Good afternoon, team. Welcome to today's webinar titled Big Brother or Better Business. I have with me today the fabulous Kylie Neal of Can Culture. And if you've seen my ugly mug before, my name is Matt Heywood of Blackguard, IT support company Blackguard. Kylie, I'm pretty excited about this one because this comes across a lot and we get this request a lot. So the title of our webinar today, Big Brother or Better Business. And I knew you were the perfect match for this because today we're going to be talking about monitoring, employee monitoring, and we're going to come at across the two different angles. So us as the IT company, we've got a quick demo in terms of how to install some of the software, what it looks like. But then there's obviously the other side of the fence, which is really the ethical considerations. There's the employee morale. There's how it's going to affect your company and your organization. So I'm super pumped by this. So again, my name is Matt Heywood and I've got Kylie from Can Culture. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, Kylie?
Absolutely. I'm very happy to be here. I think this topic is quite a controversial one when you think about it, one from a compliance perspective, but then you layer on culture on top of that. So I'm looking forward to get into the discussion about it. But a bit about me. So I have a HR consultancy called Can Culture. So we look after small to medium businesses on everything HR related. We do a psychology first slant with HR, which is what we like to say, because we do have the compliance side of things and the governance and the policies and all that type of thing, but we definitely focus on culture and how to bring people experiences to life.
Awesome. I love it. I'm going to share my screen here. I've got my PowerPoint presentation. It's so funny. Even though IT company and I share PowerPoint presentations, I always share the wrong screen. So if you know any IT companies that are good at this stuff and PowerPoint presentations, then let me know. You can see that okay on your screen, that PowerPoint presentation there.
Yes.
Great. Fantastic. So there's my ugly mug in the photo, and of course we've got the wonderful Kylie with us. So I guess the agenda really, and I'm just so keen to pick your brain on this, Kylie. So, the big question is, what, and from us, from the IT company, why do companies monitor employees? And I guess they engage us, right, when they suspect that there's an issue in terms of productivity in the organization, right? So they come to us when they got a feeling that there's something amiss. I'm not sure about yourself, but I generally speaking, I don't really have organizations that are, I don't know, like proactive about this. So they don't sort of come to us when there's not a problem. They come to us when there is. Like, have you ever had this conversation with your clients before where they want to be in the front foot on this? Does that sound like a fair statement to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that monitoring comes up a lot when you call it productivity. I kind of call it more when people are when their performance is being questioned, and that's definitely absolutely the wrong time to start the conversation about monitoring. I think monitoring should come more into place at the start. So, a lot of organisations, I think they have in their IT use policy or some policies when they onboard, they do have elements of monitoring, but it's usually not leveraged until there is a performance issue.
It's so funny. It's such a tricky thing because we all hear about policies and stuff, that when someone's inducted, they normally get like 17 policies and HR policies and like remembering my day back in corporate and the first day of being an employee, you get all these policies that you sign off. There are these 50 page documents that nobody reads in their entire mind. I haven't really ever come across a company that does it well. Do you know, like nobody's looking at these policies in 6 months time, and then someone from HR, or they engage a HR professional, they go to these like dusty old filing cabinets and I use that metaphorically because they're like sometimes on SharePoint and they're in these folder structures that nobody goes to, and then they open the document and go, oh, it refers to like stuff that we haven't used in 10 years, and then
Yep.
all of a sudden it becomes a tick box to have a policy instead of an active, living, breathing, operational document.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from a HR perspective, that's always a challenge because obviously that means if there is a breach of the IT policy, for example, under something like monitoring, but they haven't necessarily seen it for a while, if there were to be any Fair Work action, that would come into play as to whether their employees are properly educated on what's in the policies. But it does come down to, because often in employment contracts, it is you need to abide by the policies. So it is a tricky one.
Absolutely. And in the live demo, I'll do shortly as well, and we'll talk about as I'm doing the live demo, some of the monitoring tools available. And one of the main tools is called TerraMind. It's a company that's been around for a while. They do great work in employee monitoring and an installation of the software of what's called a stealth installation, meaning that if you look for the software, you can't find it because it's stealthily installed. And then your area in terms of I'm so keen on picking your brain, the legal, the ethical boundaries, the impact on company morale, communicating that you're monitoring your employees, or maybe not communicating that. Like what does that all mean? Because with the vast majority of people on this webinar and who will be looking at this webinar later are going to be business owners. So they want to know, I suppose, like what is the bottom line that is affected? And that may be tricky to answer. Like that may be tricky to answer on, well, what are the implications of the ripple effect in the organization, and like what is the silver bullet? And I'm not sure if there is a silver bullet to answer that question. I don't know. And I'm sure you'd come across, like this isn't your first time to radio, like you would come across this in your travels with employees and in your clients as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, if you look at what's the even best practice, or what is the right thing for businesses to do, if you look under the legislation that it would be governed by, we've got the Fair Work Act, we've got the Privacy Act, there's the Workplace Surveillance Act, which I think is just for New South Wales. So it is governed by legislation to protect privacy of employees. But I think when we look at it from a culture perspective, it's about being open and transparent, and what openness and transparency looks like. And from a culture perspective, one of the big factors that organisations need to look at, and a lot struggle with, is that aspect of trust. And this is one of those very controversial topics of, you don't trust me if you're monitoring my work. And I think I have seen monitoring used well in looking at workforce planning and capacity planning and that type of thing. I think that's when it's used very proactively. But I've also seen examples where it has been misused for things like, performance management, and sometimes rightfully, sometimes can be used as a bit of a leverage tool, which is not true evidence in my view from a performance perspective, but it can be misused in that. But if we look at the Fair Work Act from a terminology perspective, the Fair Work Act often talks about what's fair and reasonable, or would a reasonable person find this reasonable? So in looking at something like monitoring and what the right or the best practice is, it's very difficult because every situation is different, every organisation is different. The way that they implement and even the key messages that they put around monitoring in one organisation may be reasonable and fair, in another may not be.
That's kind of fascinating. Hey, that's kind of fascinating that it's such an interesting area because there is grayness, right? Nothing, especially in here, is a black and white, and there is grayness determine what is reasonable and fair. And I suppose if we go down that track, that bouncing ball, where it does go to the Fair Work Ombudsman, then there is the argument of what is fair and reasonable. It's kind of funny because the software I'm going to show the audience in a moment is so we've had the request before to show cause in terms of the reporting. In terms of the Fair Work, there was one individual I remember who was fired just past the probationary period, and then the employer said to me, Matt, I don't think they're working. Can you do some monitoring? Sure, no problems. And we found out that look, there's a significant portion of the day that this individual is spending on social media, on Facebook, and then so when we showed that report and then provided that, their sort of case fell over. And it's sort of a little bit funny because we were doing the reporting for all their employees in the organization, and then they went to the Fair Work Ombudsman. They got terminated, and they hadn't told us that this person was terminated. So we kind of came in like halfway through proceedings, and the argument was, oh, there was discrimination. They didn't like me. They've fired me because of these reasons. And so that's when the client came to us and said, hey, Matt, we're in the throes of the Fair Work Ombudsman, and we're sort of getting beaten pretty badly here. The reporting you spoke about, do you have these reports still? Can you bring up some reports and show us what's been happening? And we said, yeah, no problems. And so we're able to demonstrate, fairly clearly that, a good portion, I think up to 60% of their day, and it was a remote worker, was spent on Facebook and Twitter, back in the day before it was X. And so we showed the reports to them, and then all of a sudden the case for an employee fell over and they actively withdrew from that claim, right? But I guess you mentioned a great point earlier, is that, I hate to create this, or I hate to think that it's an us versus them thing, right? I hate to think it's the employer versus the employee, and this sort of almost adversarial type environment, because then it becomes almost dystopian, right? And if there's a lack of trust and all sorts of wacky things drop out, and if there's one way to tank an organization and its productivity is to create that toxicity. I don't know. Does that sound like a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've had a couple of cases before as well where IT reports and monitoring have shown excessive amount of times on inappropriate websites and inappropriate content and all types of things, which do aid performance management. And, I think more recently, we've also seen tools like, like during COVID, I had a friend that used to go surfing all the time, and he'd sit down at the beach and just keep tapping his Teams so that he was showing his light was showing green. So, I definitely think that the monitoring from an employee perspective, I think regardless of how it's used, does create an us and them, because I don't think there's many instances where an employee would advocate for their work and their time to be monitored, because the people that don't abuse it would say, well, you don't trust me, and for those who are likely to abuse it, obviously wouldn't put their hand up and say, yes, please monitor me. So I think monitoring is definitely driven by an employer to an employee, but I think if there is clarity around, and I don't think organisations do this well, even at the onboarding stage, if there was a lot more clarity about this is what we're actually monitoring, these are the reasons why, and strategically, this is why it makes sense for our business to do this monitoring. And it's not just about policy, but it's about, even if it's something in the employee handbook, or it's a conversation that's a shared experience with all employees that are on board into the organisation that talk about monitoring and when it's used and why it's used. That creates trust. But as you said, often it's like hidden a policy in the Bible of policies, and it's never actually acknowledged unless there's an issue that it needs to be referred upon.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue. So I'm gonna show the live demo, and we'll chat about as we're doing this. And it's sort of funny. I installed the agent on my on my machine, and I had to make sure before I do this that I'm not going to actually present anything on the screen to the webinar. Imagine if the IT guy like gave his password up on like the software, and I'm like, whoop, okay, there you go. So that's great. Great advertisement for us. So let me do this and share. I got it open. Cool. All right. See my screen okay, Kylie?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So I've installed this agent literally about an hour ago, and the software is called TerraMind, right? And it's based in Germany, these guys, and they can install the agent on any workstation, Mac or Windows. And so we have the ability to do a lot, right? And so we've got a whole bunch of monitoring that we can do. I've actually disabled a couple of things here just because I want to make sure to protect myself. So for example, we can detect the camera usage, which is if I want to see or activate the camera on the person's laptop so I can see that person if they're in front of their machine or not, then I can do it. For the purpose of this demo, I've actually deactivated it, but that's of interest. And so with this software, right, you can do anything and everything. And it's called monitoring, but there's also, and I think you touched on this before, Kylie, that there's also the flip side of the coin where we can say, well, we're not just monitoring the employee for the sake of making sure they're doing the right thing. We also want to assist in their productivity, right? So if we can review what they're doing throughout the day, then we may be assisting their productivity. So it's not just a way of, hey, you've gone to Facebook 2 days or twice today. What's the cause for it? It's maybe another way to go, well, actually, you're spending a lot of time on this particular application, which could be perfectly valid. Maybe we can assist you in showing another way. Right, that's sort of one of the other things. But to show you the monitoring in terms of what it can do, it's really anything and everything. And this might kind of blow your mind, and it's sort of a little bit funny. So the website's right. So this is the last hour that I've installed this on my machine, and it lists really all the things that I've been doing on my workstation for that duration of time. And obviously, if I had the agent installed for the last week, it's going to show all those reports, and I can filter that and have a look at it. And it's just my workstation we're talking about right now. So here's all the websites. So we've got a stat breakdown of all the websites, how long that I've spent on these particular websites and what I'm actually doing. And we can break this down, right? So I can see, hey, who am I actually emailing? What am I doing? We've got a help desk role happening. So I can see exactly who I've emailed and what I'm doing. I can see the file transfers. We get a whole bunch of requests of people saying, hey, look, I want to make sure that my data isn't being leaked out to third parties. My data isn't being emailed to Gmail or Hotmail emails, or, when a staff leaves my organization, I want to make sure that they haven't gone rogue and stolen my data. So we can see all the files being transferred, and we can see what's actually happening. The online meetings, the instant messages, the social media. I've disabled it for the purpose of this thing of the social media. I've disabled it here, but I can see that, hey, if I'm going on Facebook and I'm going on whatever social media platform, it'll actually present to me the chat windows, and which social media sites I've gone to and what I'm actually doing. The biggest one I see that people get up in arms about is the keystrokes, right? It will tell me literally what keys I pressed on my keyboard at any point in time of the day. It'll tell me if I've pressed the backspace or the space bar. So I'm a fast typer, but I'm often a messy typer, and I make mistakes. So I'll be typing something and I've got a backspace and then typing correctly. And you can see here I'm particularly special because I'm typing TerraMind and I'm having to making a lot of backspaces and then press the enter key. This particular section of keystrokes, so if someone goes right to, let's say they open up a personal mailbox, someone goes to Facebook, someone goes to Hotmail, someone goes to a personal location on a work computer, then I'll be able to see what their password is in clear text, right? And this section I often find is not communicated, or they don't want people to know that I can see what your password is, right? And it's so funny. And the question that you asked me, Kylie, before we started, is you said to me, Matt, do you monitor your employees? And my answer was, no, I don't. And I guess the reason why is because we're a smaller company, myself and 4 staff members, we're in the office, so it's very cognizant who's working and who's not, right? Um, and from my perspective, when clients come to me and say, Matt, what do you think about the implications, about the moral implications for this? My answer is always the same, right? And I say, look, from our perspective, we're the IT company. We're really the humble IT service, and our job isn't to make a decision from the moral standpoint of is this right or is this wrong. We are here to say here's the technical capabilities of what it can do, and I guess the position that we do take, we say, look, if you're on a work device or on a work laptop, then you should be doing work, right? That's the kind of position we take. And I know a lot of employees and organizations, and us included as well, they say, well, look, Matt, people come to work, they want to check their Facebook, and I don't expect them, right, to be on work-related stuff from 9 to 5. If they're on their lunch break and they want to check their Hotmail or whatever, or their Facebook or their social media, look, I'm okay with that. We're an outcomes-based organization, right? If as long as they get the job done, then they're free to do whatever they want to do in their own time. And we say, great, no problems. Well, they've got a phone normally or an iPhone. They can check it on that device in their lunch break, right? So I guess the position we take is work stuff should be done on work-related equipment, and personal stuff should be done on personal-related equipment.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on this, Kylie?
Yeah, look, I definitely agree with that. I agree that work and work tools and resources should be for work, and personal on personal devices. It's not always the reality these days. I think, because lots of people, they might have work phones and not want to carry around 2 phones. So they often have work things on work phones. One of my best friends, she's a project manager, and she would always say to me, I work in short bursts of amazingness. So, if you look at the different styles of work, this type of data, it kind of gives me anxiety, because there's obviously the behavioral element. Someone might be, doing the right keystrokes, or, doing the right amount of focus time, and not looking at Facebook or not signing into their personal emails, but their productivity may not be great, their outputs may not be great. Whereas somebody else who is, kind of randomly looking at Facebook a couple of times a day, or checking their personal emails or their bank accounts or whatever it might be, but have a really strong work ethic and really strong outputs. So to me, data, we need to be really careful about what information it is actually giving us and what information it's not giving us. I do think that there may be I want to kind of word this right, because I don't want to call it a laziness tool, but I think if, organizations are relying on data, I think what misses, and they're relying too much on this aiding decision making on individuals, for example. I think there is the risk that they're missing out on some really important behavioural factors. They're also really missing out on the open communication of being really constructive with their employees about what they're actually working on, where they see their barriers are, because they're purely looking at it from a report perspective of what the report is saying and how true and reflective that is of true work. Not
Absolutely.
convinced.
I couldn't have said that better as well. I think you're absolutely right. You've got to combine. Well, you've got the technical, but you've really got to combine the people side of it, right? If you're just relying on a report that really doesn't address the human element to it at all, yeah, huge trouble. I think if you go down that path, and I've seen it before. Right? I've seen it before where people look at those reports and then go, yeah, they suck, right? And then they make decisions based on that, and then it turns out there's actually reasons behind it. They just haven't, for example, known how to do a particular process, or they haven't been shown how to structure or log in or do something that other people haven't taken for granted. But if you look at these reports just in the face value, it can potentially paint a picture that is not the truth.
Mm, mm. I think another element of it is if it's looking at it from an activity perspective is, there's obviously a big factor of psychosocial awareness and the psychosocial factors. A lot of employees are saying now that they're very busy, and that busyness can create overwhelm, that busyness can create burnouts because they don't have those little micro rests during their day, and they don't have the opportunity to kind of reset. If they're in a call center, for example, and they're having they're being monitored with how many calls, how long they're on the phone for, and when they're picking up the phone next again, if they're not given the space to regroup after, a difficult conversation, and they just have to keep getting back on the phone and they're not resetting, mental health injuries can occur. And that can have more of an impact, which, it's kind of going over to a completely different topic, but I think this monitoring doesn't consider things like that as well.
Totally. And we absolutely, and we get the question a lot, from this side in terms of, because we're IT, and so we get this question a lot, mainly from employees, and they're more about the questions from at a barbecue, right? So I'm like, hey, what do you do? I run an IT company. Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, can my employer monitor me? And it's always a resounding, of course they can, right? Like, of course they can. But they don't really know what that means, and IT is often like this black hole, right? This black hole of, oh, they do IT, but we don't really see them a whole lot, and they do stuff behind the scenes, and we definitely notice that they're there when something happens, right? Then all of a sudden, oh, wow, I didn't know they're reporting all this, and geez, where did this come from? But the answer for me is, yeah, like, of course, like, and the question, oh, can they see my emails? Absolutely. Like, can they see what I'm typing? Potentially, yes. Whatever you're doing on the machine, wherever you're going, yeah, we can see that. And not that we've got IT people who are actively, we're not in like a room with like 24 cameras around the room where we're looking at the screens and going, oh, Jane just sent an email to Bob over there. Okay, keep track of that. It's all rule based, where if something is triggered, then a human comes in to go, well, let's have a look at that. If that makes sense. And we can see as well, so, and I'm going to show in terms of the rule-based things in a minute, and we can obviously see what Google searches and what other searches are being performed. What's being printed. Have I printed something for the printer that, just so I want to know. The kind of the interesting one here, though, and you might find this a bit amusing, is so it takes a constant video recording of the screen. And if I show you this is going to a player, right? And it's going to show me a recording of exactly of my screen. And I can go back at any point in time to go, hey, what was I actually doing? So if someone said to me, Matt, I want to know what my employee was doing at 12 p.m. last week, then I can do that. And as you can see, I've got 3 screens. You can see where I'm going to, what I'm doing, so I can prove that where I'm clicking, what my mouse is doing. I could zoom in on any one particular screen to see what I'm doing, but like I can see everything, right? I can see exactly where my mouse is being clicked, what I'm doing, who I'm talking to. So in the example, I think before the webinar as well, or it might have been during the webinar when he mentioned, what if I've got one of those devices, and I think of The Simpsons, where it's one of those ducks, and it goes and presses the Y key like every 5 seconds to make sure that the device is being used. Like, what if I've got a duck that presses the Y key every 5 seconds? Can that be detected? Well, yeah, because we can see just then on the screen that I can see what you're actually doing, and it takes not only a video, but it takes a screen snapshots every 5 minutes that it takes. So no, every 10 minutes. So I can see, all right, let's in 10-minute intervals, let's go back and have a look at, what I was doing in that time, because it's recording, it's taking snapshots of my screen. It's doing all this stuff as well. So super powerful, and this is often the behind the scenes that employees don't get to see because, it's the IT company that
Yeah.
deploys this stuff, if that makes sense. Have you seen this before, Kylie? Are you thoroughly scared now,
Uh,
or?
I am the anxiety, and that was before I saw that. But I think it like I kind of say that it can get dangerous when people are looking at it for performance management. But there have been some real situations with bullying, in particular, with informal chat things like Teams and what have you. And I remember when they first come out, I can't even remember what system it was, but a lot of people thought that they weren't monitored because it was just an informal chat. And I've pulled on those for lots of investigations, which have been very solid evidence for disciplinary action. But no doubt with the technology, with this system, with the way it is now, and being able to do things like that, because I remember, back in the day, it was like you could do words, and you could set certain words for it to give an alert. I'm sure, with my mate going surfing and, pressing the tapping on it for it to go green, and the Simpsons episode, I'm sure this would be, way beyond that, to be able to provide alerts when there's activity that's not the norm, which would be quite sophisticated, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this thing, and I'll sort of jump ahead because there's a thing called rules. So you can configure, like inside the Terramind, you can configure it to do whatever you want. So you can configure it to go, look, these are the applications that we use. So if I'm a marketing company, I use Facebook, for example. Yeah, it's social media, but it's also classified as an in-house application. And so it can categorize between like what's classified as productive and what's classified as non-productive. So by specifying the applications that we use internally, I can say, yeah, that's my application, that's my bread and butter, our team uses, so classify this as productivity. Whereas if I'm using anything else, then it's non-productive work. And they always change the rules here, but there were these pre-configured rules that I saw that can show us. Let's have a quick look for now. These pre-configured rules that I just want to show you for a second. Maybe it's under behavior. Yeah, here we go. So under behavior that we spoke about is there's a number of pre-configured rules. So they've been doing this for a while. So a lot of people, they ask similar questions, right? So there's some pre-configured rules that are on by default. Violet words. So across anything on my workstation, if I was in a chat window or I sent an email to an employee or God forbid to a customer where I was particularly rude and sent some violent words, well, it's going to flag that, right? And I can specify who in my organization would want to see that. If it's maybe a line manager, to say, well, I want to know if any of my staff are speaking rudely. Some other pre-configured rules that are on by default. If someone's on social media for more than 50 minutes of the day, then yeah, I want to know that, right? Any credit card information, any instant message usage. If someone's attempting to log into a remote system, if someone's searching for jobs, right? If someone's on Seek or Monster or Indeed or another platform like this, that may indicate that my staff are leaving, maybe because they're being monitored. Who knows? Then I want to know. Then I want to know that, right? And so we can add more rules. So we can specify whatever our heart desires, whatever we want to monitor in the organization of what, who, how, when. It's all doable. But a lot of the pre-configured templates they've got that they're on by default. A lot of the main ones that people ask similar questions on this, and we've got these pre-configured rules in terms of employee behavior and what they're doing. There is this thing called productivity, so time worked, and because I've just installed it in the last hour, this productivity, it won't show up until the next day. It's a 24-hour thing, this part, but it'll actually break down my day on how productive I am. So if I've said, yeah, here's my application, do we use LinkedIn that's our bread and butter, and maybe we use, I don't know, entire HR, another application. It'll actually give me a breakdown. So if I've spent 4 hours on entire HR and I've got an 8-hour shift, then the last 4 hours was spent on something else, then 4 hours of my day is productive, right? And it can break that. It can break that down. We've got this other thing called risk as well. So it's called risky objects. Inside, we use TeamViewer quite a lot to remotely connect to our clients' machines. However, it's classified, and probably rightly so, as a risky software here. So if someone's connecting to our company from outside the network, then TeamViewer is marked as what's called risky software. And it'll break down with risky users if there's some behavior or some violations, or there's something about the user's workstation which is a pattern that is somewhat different towards the other employees of the organization. It'll mark it. It doesn't use AI, but it uses a rule-based sort of violation triggers to determine, based on the entire organization, if something is risky or something is worth at least you viewing to notify to go, hey, something might be amiss here.
Have you ever had any client that, because I've never used it this way, but I was wondering if you've ever had any clients where they want all their employees to have access to it so they can self-manage their productivity and data?
Never.
No.
No, I've never had it. I've never. The only time. It's funny. The only time that we've installed this is that it's never. Generally speaking, it's never a proactive thing. It's always reactive. In fact, maybe I'll backtrack on that. The only time I've ever seen it used proactively was from a reactive situation. So let me flesh it out. So we had a client recently came to us and said, Matt, I got remote staff in the Philippines. I think they're taking the mickey and not working. Can you deploy software to monitor them? Sure, no problem. So deployed employee monitoring to them, and sure enough, that they weren't really working effectively, and then they got moved on. As a result of that, though, the company then said, all right, as a proactive measure, we're now going to modify our company policy where just by default, anytime we get a new staff member, remote or onshore, is they're going to be monitored. So they took a reactive situation and I guess they made it proactive.
Yeah.
But I generally have never seen this software or a client come to us to deploy the software from their own volition, right? That they're like, hey, I just want to make sure that we're above board, and it's normally always that there's a problem.
Yeah.
Let's put this in place.
Yeah. And I mean, if that's the case, then if you look at the intent and purpose of why these things are implemented, it is normally to find cracks or to, manage and problem solve a negative situation rather than it being a positive thing. So when we talk about employee versus employer, monitoring tools are very much an employer tool.
Yeah, you're right. And also, like in this particular software, it's important to note that like for us personally, that I only make sure to give access to the senior techs in our company, because if we're monitoring keystrokes and personal data, the question might come up, well, I'm putting a lot of trust in you as the IT company, and damn straight that's true. And if I'm putting my credit card details in, Matt, I trust you because you're the IT company. I've got a relationship with you. The staff member under you, though, that I don't know, well, how do I know that something untoward might not be occurring, or they're copying information that's mine for whatever reason to then go and leak that data or use it, right? And look, it's a great question, and I've always said that as IT companies that we are the custodians of really their entire business, right, in terms of the IT and what we can do. And with that trust, with that great trust comes great responsibility. So I'm pretty heavy-handed on making sure that when we implement these systems, that the only people that and from our technicians who have access to this software are the senior technicians who have been around, and they're not just to the junior staff. And if there's a request or report required from our client, well, the junior staff can't action it because it's got to go to a senior tech, because there's an additional amount of trust in place with that, right? And I guess it often becomes then, well, who polices the police? And that's just my policy, I suppose, that I put in internally in our company.
Mm.
The big question to you, though, Kylie, is, I guess, and I'll stop sharing the screen. I mean, this is the technical tools, but I'm so keen to know, like what is what's the I don't know. This is a hard question to answer, but like, what's the bottom dollar? What's the bottom dollar that could affect? And I know we said it before. Like, should we employ monitors? Should we not? And it depends on the situation. Is there any examples that you can give, or you've had in the past, where like it is suitable to monitor, and what were the outcomes?
Yeah, look, I think we see this more in larger organizations, because I think there's also putting the monitoring systems in place is one thing. What they're actually used for is another thing. And I think, some organizations, and even, I think any size organizations can do this, but they might put monitoring information in place with the best intention for it to be for a work planning tool. And I think the work planning tool and the capacity is worthwhile. I think it is useful, because if you look at that from a strategic perspective, and that's when it's used proactively. I haven't actually seen this done well too many times. If it's, say that there was 10 people doing the same job, and they would monitor and take averages to say when the work increases to a certain amount, that's when it prompts to recruit another person, because that's what the data of capacity has said that's related to workload. I think that is when it's used well. I think for when is it worthwhile for the bottom line? If we look at it from a negative perspective, for one of the better word, and what this monitoring is generally used for, say for example there was a bullying case, and with the as I said, I've had a couple of situations where informal chat scripts have been pulled up by these monitoring tools that have been very, very valuable, and it's really enabled the organisation to then train all their staff on bullying. They should be doing that anyway, but to do a refresh and to make sure that they are dealing with the problems that it has shown, because even though it may be one individual, if you look at being able to adequately deal with that one person can have a really big impact on culture. And if the organisation is trying to do everything they can to have a really positive culture, and there's behaviours and tolerances of bullying going on, which can be solved by getting scripts like that, then from a bottom line perspective, that obviously has a really big impact indirectly to a monitoring tool.
Yeah, and from your experience, I mean, do you think if a client came to you and said, "Look, Kyle, I'm having some doubts about my staff internally," like what would, in your opinion, what should the first course of action be? And they said, "Oh, maybe I want to put some monitoring in place," but would you say, "Well, actually, let's maybe take a step back for a second, and before we start to install stuff, is there an open conversation to the team?" And you may not say this to the person, but could they be the problem? Like, if they're saying, "Hey, my staff suck," and then as you uncover, could you, well, actually, you're pretty mean, and this is the reason why, right? And this, I guess, is the softer side, the human side of what you do, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, and good old-fashioned conversations will outdo any tech tool any day. And that's what kind of concerns me with these monitoring tools, is that it does give leaders data, which sometimes, if they're not skilled in having courageous conversations or being able to give and receive feedback really openly with their team, and there's some dysfunction, leveraging data and having that as the basis is, in my view and opinion, not really the right course of action. I think if there are doubts, even if it kind of starts with this intuitive gut feeling, I don't think this person's being as productive as they could be, have the conversation. There might be something going on with that person that's mental health, or they might be experiencing something. They might be feeling really challenged with tasks they've got to do, but they don't want to raise it with you, so raise it with them. I think data should sit in the background, but it should definitely not take away from really open and transparent conversations. You've mentioned a couple of times that normally companies come to a place where they're wanting to introduce monitoring because of a reaction to a situation that they're resolving. So if you look at what that looks like from an employee perspective of, Joe over there, he just got terminated because something that an IT report showed. Next minute, we're all being monitored, but Joe was the problem, not us. We were just trying to do our jobs, and we're actually getting reprimanded because we're being monitored now. I don't know when the right time to introduce monitoring is, but I feel like it's definitely not in that reactionary phase. It needs to be really strategic and on purpose and communicated with the intent, and the intent needs to be the buy-in and the champions from a leadership team level as to what the positive intention is going to be of this monitoring, rather than it's a reaction, you're all going to be monitored from here on in.
And the positiveness from the monitoring is, well, obviously is to make sure they're all productive, we're all doing the right thing. In a perfect world though, and this might be a hard question to answer because it dances within our respective realms, but would you say in a perfect world that monitoring shouldn't ever have a place if the culture is at a point where we're doing things right by our humans? Like, is there ever a time in an organization who have got really great culture, really great policies, really treat their staff well, that employee monitoring should be unneeded, right? That there should be no requirement potentially for it.
Well, given that it's normally leveraged when there's a problem, it's not normally leveraged when there's not a problem. So if there's not a question of productivity, it's generally not leveraged. If it was used in, and even if we look at it with capacity and the example of when to get the next hire, like, to me that's a positive intention of using monitoring tools. So it can really clearly see when the company should invest in additional resources. You ask an employee when that would be, and they would say yesterday, but you actually need to, if you had data, to be able to say, okay, cool, well we've got this much overload of work, therefore it's an additional resource. So I think it can be useful in that time, but if there was a really great culture, the right conversations were being had, and there was an appropriate understanding of what performance looked like in the individuals, where the gaps were in skill sets and all those types of things, like that should first and foremost govern a next hire rather than data. So in effect, probably if every culture was utopia, I don't see where monitoring would be useful.
It's so funny because, and I'm always super curious with your side of the fence in terms of the culture, because it's so much more human based, and not that ours isn't, but normally always when they come to us, it's all very cold and rigid isn't the word, but we're IT companies, so we're kind of we work in hard rules, right? So we work in, we've got monitoring. It's more black and white, exactly right. And so when they come to us, it's almost always there's a problem, there's a question about efficiency, and we can follow that tangent, right? So there's a question about employee efficiency, and it's super easy to go, well, employee efficiency, employees who are not as efficient as they should or could be results in a lower bottom line. Like we can see the connection super clearly between net profit, dollars in the bank, and employees who are not performing, or maybe employees who are performing but could be more productive, right? So we often see that connection, and as we both know, the two of the main drivers of cost in any business is going to be commercial lease or mortgage and staffing costs. I had this conversation recently with a person from an accountancy firm, and we were talking about AI. I was at a networking event, right? And we had this, and it's sort of on the vein of what we're talking about, and we were talking about AI, and we come across the conversation, the topic of, AI is going to replace employees, no doubt about it. And I said to this person, I said, look, you've got 20 accountants under you. Let's say, for example, I could introduce tomorrow a piece of software using AI, which had the cost of one employee, and that could do the job of 20 accountants of your entire staff. So essentially, what I'm asking you, would you sack your entire team to implement AI if it meant some really grotesque margins of savings rates? He thought about the question for about 10 seconds and said, absolutely. Yep. I would get rid of my entire staff if I could use AI and save, 20 accountants' wages, which is quite dramatic. Would I get rid of my staff for the bottom line? Absolutely. And I asked that question around the table. There's 20 or so owners around there, and I think probably 15 said, yeah, I would. And then 5 said, nah, I've got a connection to my staff, food in the table. I want to make sure they're okay. So I was super fascinated by that. I was super fascinated because, it just draws so many questions about the ethics and the responsibilities as leaders, as owners. Are we responsible for the well-being and food in the table? And if we could make more dollars in our companies, which as the directors or directors of the organization, it's obviously going to come to us. Like, what is the right approach? I don't know. It was a very interesting question.
Gosh, I mean, that goes into a whole new realm if we start talking about AI. But I think, even though AI is in a way taking over a lot of particularly transactional things, we talk about it a lot through HR trends, and at the end of the day, there is always going to be people. And, the more that we kind of step away from the people interaction, I mean, that creates its whole new sort of problems. But we don't know what jobs, I can't recall the statistic, but it was something like, the jobs that are available today aren't going to be available in the future, but they're going to be replaced by jobs which are just in a very, very different form. So that does pose what the future of work looks like and what transferable skills we as human beings that are in the workplace have to offer, whatever this new world is, which is very undefined at the moment, I feel. And I don't think we'll actually know until AI starts to calm down a little bit, and who knows if it will. But I don't really know it too clearly. But, I think, and I work in HR, right? So I've got a bit of a different lens on it to an accountant, but I would not be able to run my business without my team.
Absolutely.
I would not be able to do my business without my consultants having conversations with my clients. There's a lot of, as I said, we do HR psychology first. So we have lots of advisory conversations. There's lots of emotions that leaders have, that employees have, that we help to distinguish what that looks like and what's the appropriateness within a workplace and how they resolve that. So those types of things, yes, someone could ask an AI bot like what to do if they're having a problem with their leader, but maybe we will get there. But I think there are some roles that will change but I don't think there's always going to be people. And while there's always people, there's always relationships, there's always emotions, there's always mental health, there's always, all these structures that we're so used to as society. And I don't think AI can take over all of them.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And I'm totally in your boat as well. It's got to be about people first, and the values of any organization really come from the top. And some, I guess you're right, some industries are going to be more transactional than others. But it's for any enjoyable workplace, then if you're relying solely on tech and AI to do a job, and AI can do so many things, what it can't do is that real human to human interaction. We recently brought up a law firm, actually. So the software we're talking about, the Terramine, 60 solicitors and lawyers, and they're all across Australia. And so on what I'm talking about some transactional organizations, lawyers can be like that, right? So they bill per like minute, and they go to the printer and get off print off a piece of document, they charge you for it, and it's a lot of money that they charge, right? And so we sent a proposal to them, 60 lawyers, and they want to implement this to increase their efficiency. So that's what they wanted. So they've got a certain amount of hours that they expect their solicitors to bill per day, provided the work is there. And they're like, Matt, we want to make sure we bill 6 hours to our lawyers and solicitors at any point in time. And that's what we want. And so I sent them a proposal, 60 lawyers, and it was going to take us probably 50 hours or so to get it right and talk. And there's a bunch of back and forth. Sent them the proposal. They said, oh, look, budget, blah, 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 and this, and, next financial year, let's have a chat. And I said, yeah, look, no problems. And the position I took with them, just because I know law firms, and we've got a number of clients at law firms, and I said, yeah, look, no problems. We can engage past the financial year. Just a question to you, though, right? Is that you mentioned that you want your solicitors to bill 6 hours per day. What's the average rate that they charge? $300-400. Okay, great. So let's say if we could get your efficiency by 1 hour per solicitor per day based on the reporting, what would that mean to you? And they were like, oh, well, let's work it out, right? So cool, 1 hour per day times 60 lawyers times, a week, X amount of dollars. And I said, well, okay, just so you're aware, the proposal I've sent to you is a sixth of the cost you presented with me. So the return on investment is less than a month. The light switch went off in their brain. All of a sudden, yep, cool, Matt, sign, go ahead.
Yeah.
So because they were so transactional and that's how they operate, that connection and the value was easily seen. And we're just starting to work with them. And again, there's no judgment. We're the humble IT company in terms of the turn. We haven't worked with them long enough in terms of the retention, in terms of the turnover, in terms of all the stuff that you do, the employee happiness. So that if you sat down with her and said, are you happy? You can answer anonymously. What would the answer be? I don't know, but I can suspect, right, based on that any organization that says we operate in such a very robotic transactional way where we're not maybe treating our employees, and I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong, but you've got to treat employees as humans first, and then the monitoring, if needed, should be complementary to that, right? It shouldn't be the opposite. It shouldn't be treating your staff as employees and monitoring them to such a point where it's restrictive. And it's funny because I know it almost sounds like I'm shooting myself in the foot because we're the big bad guys that actually do the software installation. But I guess from a value perspective, I'm in your boat first. Treat them like employees first, and not like robots, right?
Yeah. And I mean, there probably is going to be more and more value for tools like monitoring because it probably does, cut through questions with data. So, who knows where it will go to next. And at the end of the day, employees, when they're at work, they are being compensated to do a job. So, there is that element of it as well. When you look at productivity, it's like, well, regardless of styles or behavior or short bursts of amazingness or whatever value you put on your work, you are compensated for doing a job. And if the outputs aren't there, then the monitoring tool does give it that data to access.
Absolutely. Kylie, I could chat to you all day and night on this. I'm just super grateful for taking your time today. Let me just share my screen super quick. So I've got our details on the recording in case anyone would like to contact us, contact you more likely because no one wants to speak to me, Kylie. So let me just share this super quick. Perfect. So for the team and the audience, again, it's now 3 o'clock. Kylie, thank you so much for your time today in discussing this. My name is Matt Heywood. This is Kylie Neal from Can Culture, all things culture related, and I'm just humble IT nerds. Thanks for joining us today. If you've got any questions, hey, look, don't be a stranger. Our details, our emails are on the screen in front of you. And have a great day. And Kylie, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. Thanks, Dad. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
See ya.